Before the first European ships appeared on the horizon, indigenous communities across North America were already linked by corridors of commerce. Traders paddled birch-bark canoes loaded with furs, shell beads and foodstuffs, following river highways from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast and beyond. Archaeologists have traced marine shell ornaments from the Gulf of Mexico in inland sites as far north as the Dakotas, proving that goods and ideas flowed over hundreds of miles. Along the Mississippi River, the Mississippian culture erected immense earthen mounds, some reaching 100 feet high, at sites like Cahokia, which around AD 1100 housed perhaps 20,000 inhabitants. These agrarian chiefdoms combined intensive maize agriculture with complex social hierarchies, supporting large populations and satellite villages connected by trading paths. In forested woodlands and river valleys, indigenous farmers perfected companion planting, maize stalks provided support for climbing beans, while squash vines spread between them to shade the soil, retain moisture and deter pests. This Three Sisters technique not only sustained dense populations, but also reflected a holistic agricultural philosophy that honed soil nutrients without synthetic inputs. Centuries before 1787, the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois Confederacy, maintained a federal system uniting the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations. Guided by a great law of peace, they elected decision-makers through clan councils and practiced consensus governance, influencing later democratic thinkers when the U.S. Constitutional Convention sought models for a republican government. In 1821, Sequoyah, a multilingual silversmith of the Cherokee, developed a written syllabary of 85 characters enabling rapid literacy among his people. Within 4 years, the Cherokee Nation published its own newspaper, and by 1827, most tribal members could read and write in their native language. Sequoyah's invention stands as the only wholly original syllabary created in North America. From Ohio's Serpent Mound, an effigy of a curling snake stretching almost 1,300 feet, to the circular and square earthworks of the Hopewell culture, these earthen edifices served as astronomical calendars, ceremonial centers, and communal gathering places. Built over centuries, they testify to a technical mastery of surveying and large-scale cooperation, challenging stereotypes of primitive societies. The mid-18th century British colonies along America's eastern seaboard had long enjoyed and jealously guarded their own elected assemblies, where local elites debated taxes, laws and defences independently of London. Under the mercantilist system imposed by Parliament, colonists supplied raw materials to Britain and purchased its manufactured goods, creating simmering economic resentments when acts like the Navigation and Townshend laws restricted trade and imposed duties on everyday imports. When Parliament levied the Stamp Act in 1765, mandating that legal documents, newspapers and even playing cards bear an official stamp purchased from London, colonists erupted in protest. Patrick Henry's Virginia Resolves declared that taxation without representation is tyranny, and 9 colonies sent delegates to the Stamp Act Congress in New York, formally petitioning the Crown to rescind the tax. Newspapers, tavern debates, and Sons of Liberty agitators spread the rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," into every frontier settlement and port city. By April 1775, skirmishes at Lexington and Concord ignited full-scale war. Delegates to the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia oversaw the creation of a Continental Army under George Washington's command, and in the summer of 1776 appointed Thomas Jefferson to draft a formal declaration. Jefferson's early draft condemned the international slave trade as a cruel war against human nature. Language later struck to secure Southern support, foreshadowing the central paradox of America's founding. At its heart, the Declaration of Independence rested on Enlightenment principles of natural rights, understood as inalienable rights granted by nature or God, and recognized, not bestowed, by governments. Philosophers from John Locke to colonial pamphleteers defined these rights as belonging to individuals in a state of nature, preceding any social compact. Jefferson's phrase, "life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," distilled this tradition into rhetoric that would echo worldwide. On July 4, 1776, delegates approved the Declaration's assertion that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, legitimizing revolution when rulers violate fundamental rights. Yet the same document upheld compromises, most notably careful silence on slavery, to maintain unity among the 13 fractious colonies. In constructing the new nation's first governing charter, the Articles of Confederation, ratified 1781, created a loose confederacy that lacked executive authority to levy taxes or regulate commerce, leaving Congress dependent on voluntary state contributions. By 1786, economic turmoil and interstate rivalries convinced leaders that a stronger federal framework was essential. The Philadelphia Convention of 1787 assembled luminaries like Washington, Madison, and Franklin to replace the Articles, with a constitution balancing federal and state power, featuring mechanisms such as separation of powers and checks and balances designed to prevent tyranny. Delegates sharply debated representation formulas, ultimately enshrining compromises like equal Senate seats for each state and House apportionment based on population. Ratification hinged on the publication of the Federalist Papers, 85 essays by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay, arguing that the proposed constitution would secure liberty more effectively than the weak confederal system. New York's delegates were persuaded in part by these arguments, and by mid-1788, the required 9 states had ratified, launching the republic that survives today. Long after the guns fell silent at Appomattox, the nation still bore the scars of a conflict born in centuries of division. What began as disputes over states' rights and economic interests, tobacco and cotton plantations in the South versus emerging industrial mills in the North, quickly became a moral battle over the future of slavery in America. When Abraham Lincoln's 1860 election convinced Southern leaders that their way of life was threatened, South Carolina seceded in December, and 6 more Deep South states soon followed, forming the Confederacy and setting the stage for war. In April 1861, Confederate artillery opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, and Lincoln responded by calling for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, catapulting the nation into its deadliest conflict. Over the next 4 years, more than 360,000 Union soldiers and 258,000 Confederates would lose their lives, about 2% of the U.S. population at the time, making the Civil War the bloodiest war in American history. As the conflict raged, President Lincoln framed it as a fight not only to preserve the Union but to transform it. The Emancipation Proclamation of January 1, 1863, declared freedom for enslaved people in rebelling states, adding moral force to the Union cause and allowing black men to enlist in the U.S. Army and Navy for the first time. The war also pioneered the concept of total war, as generals like Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman targeted not just enemy armies, but the economic resources, railroads, farms, and factories vital to the Confederate war effort. The Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863 marked a turning point. Over 3 days of brutal fighting in Pennsylvania, Union and Confederate forces clashed in a struggle that left more than 50,000 soldiers dead, wounded, or missing, ending Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North and shifting momentum to the Union armies. In late 1864, General Sherman's march to the sea epitomized the new war strategy. Abandoning traditional supply lines, his troops cut a swath of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah, crippling the Southern economy and eroding civilian morale. By April 1865, Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse and the Union was preserved, but the work of rebuilding had only just begun. Congress moved swiftly to define what freedom and citizenship would mean in the former Confederacy. The Freedmen's Bureau, created in March 1865, provided food, housing, and medical care, established nearly 3,000 schools, and offered legal assistance to formerly enslaved people and impoverished whites. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 then guaranteed that all persons born in the United States were citizens with equal benefit of the law, laying the groundwork for the 14th Amendment's Birthright Citizenship Clause in 1868 and the 15th Amendment's guarantee of voting rights to black men in 1870. Yet Southern states enacted black codes to restrict African Americans' freedom of movement, labor choices, and legal rights, effectively sustaining a system of forced labor and social control. When land confiscation plans faltered, sharecropping emerged. Families, black and white, rented fields from large landowners, giving a portion of their harvest in exchange for tools and housing, a cycle that often trapped sharecroppers in debt peonage. Resistance to black political participation grew violent. From 1868 into the early 1870s, the Ku Klux Klan operated as a clandestine terror network, using intimidation, assault, and murder to undermine Reconstruction governments and suppress black voting. By 1877, Northern support for Reconstruction waned. The Compromise of 1877, an informal deal that resolved the disputed 1876 presidential election, pulled federal troops from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction and allowing white Southern Democrats to reassert control, disenfranchise black citizens, and institute Jim Crow segregation that would last for nearly a century. By 1880, the US was producing approximately 1.4 million tons of steel annually. By 1900, output had soared to over 11 million tons, surpassing Great Britain as the world's largest steel manufacturer. Rail mileage exploded in parallel, from roughly 50,000 miles of track in 1870 to more than 193,000 miles by 1900, creating a continental web that lowered costs, opened new markets, and unified regional economies. These railroads not only hauled raw materials to steel mills and factories, but also carried finished goods coast to coast, knitting together a single national market. Industrial fortunes surged as entrepreneurs capitalized on economies of scale. Andrew Carnegie's steel empire drove relentless production. Workers endured 12-hour days for $10 a week in 1890, fueling skyscraper and railroad construction nationwide. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust, formed in 1882, controlled nearly every aspect of oil refining and distribution, dictating prices and stifling competition. J.P. Morgan's Morganization consolidated railroads, steel, and electricity into massive holding companies, attracting European investment but raising fears of monopolistic power. Public backlash culminated in the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the first federal law outlawing monopolies and trusts, laying the groundwork for later regulations. The discovery of vast petroleum fields and improvements in drilling and refining techniques spurred an oil boom by the 1880s, fueling kerosene lamps and later internal combustion engines in the early 1900s. Meanwhile, the War of the Currents pitted Edison's direct current against Tesla and Westinghouse's alternating current, ultimately bringing reliable electric lighting and power into factories, streetcars, and homes, dramatically extending productive hours and improving urban life. This electrification, alongside factory jobs, drew millions from farms into burgeoning cities, ushering in an era of rapid urbanization and a new working-class culture. In April 1898, the United States leveraged its industrial navy to defeat Spain in just 4 months, seizing Puerto Rico and Guam outright and purchasing the Philippines for $20 million under the Treaty of Paris, December 10, 1898. Guam's strategic position, 1,500 miles from the Philippines, exemplified America's newfound reach in both the Caribbean and the Pacific. This swift victory and territorial gain signaled to the world that American factories and arsenals had produced not only consumer goods but also the ships, rifles, and ammunition to project power globally. At the close of World War II, in 1945, the United States stood virtually alone among the great powers, with its industrial and civilian infrastructure unscathed by enemy bombing. Having converted much of its manufacturing base to wartime production, tank factories, shipyards, aircraft plants, and the secret Manhattan Project, the US produced roughly half of the world's industrial output in those final months, a testament to its total war mobilization that harnessed every sector of the economy for victory. By 1947, Washington held some 70% of the world's gold reserves, cementing the dollar's credibility and undergirding its emergence as the globe's dominant currency. In June 1945, delegates from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to sign the United Nations Charter, determined to prevent another catastrophic conflict. As one of the Big Five victors, the United States secured a permanent seat on the Security Council alongside Britain, China, France, and the Soviet Union, with veto power over any substantive resolution. This arrangement embodied America's new role as guarantor of collective security, even as it navigated the tension between idealism and strategic interests. Before the guns were cold, American planners reshaped the global economy. At Bretton Woods in July 1944, US leadership fashioned an international monetary system anchored by the dollar, convertible to gold at $35 an ounce, and established the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Then, in 1948, the Marshall Plan poured some $17 billion, over $250 billion in today's dollars, into European reconstruction, reviving shattered economies and binding the continent to American markets. Almost before the ink on peace treaties could dry, the United States confronted a new adversary in the Soviet Union. Guided by George Kennan's doctrine of containment, the strategic effort to check communist expansion at every turn, the Truman Doctrine and NATO alliance embodied a global commitment to resist subversion and coercion. The Cold War erupted in Korea in 1950 and flared in proxy conflicts from Vietnam to Afghanistan, testing the limits of American power and resolve. With the Soviet collapse in 1991, the United States enjoyed a brief unipolar moment, projecting military force from the Gulf War through peacekeeping in the Balkans. Yet by the early 21st century, a multipolar era had dawned. China now rivals the United States in nominal GDP, together accounting for over 40% of the world's output, and sits atop global supply chains, while Russia retains formidable nuclear and conventional arsenals as the world's second-ranked military power. At home, America's promise of equal opportunity has frayed. The Gini coefficient, a measure of income inequality ranging from 0, perfect equality, to 1, maximal inequality, has climbed above 0.41, one of the highest among advanced economies, as wage growth has skewed toward the top 1%. Meanwhile, the United States still emits roughly 11% of global greenhouse gases, the second largest national share, fueling a climate crisis that hits vulnerable communities first and hardest. Political life has grown equally strained. Surveys show deep affective polarization. Majorities in each party now view the other as closed-minded and dishonest, and more than half of Americans believe the two-party system leaves critical issues underaddressed. Debates over constitutional interpretation, originalism versus the living constitution, underscore how contending visions of America's founding continue to shape today's battles over rights, governance, and national identity. As we look forward, the question remains: can the United States reconcile its global responsibilities with its founding creed, renewing both its international leadership and domestic promise in an age of shared challenges and deep divisions? From the dawn of indigenous innovation through revolution, civil strife, industrial might, and global leadership, the United States story reminds us that history is an ongoing journey shaped by both triumph and tension. Our exploration today has shown how creativity, conflict, and resilience have woven the tapestry of this nation, forging its identity through discovery and debate. We hope this journey has sparked your curiosity to learn more about the events, ideas, and unsung figures who continue to influence the United States' path forward. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling voyage. If you enjoyed the ride, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. For further reading and deeper insights, please refer to the sources listed in the description below.